Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to this CEO interview series where I am interviewing Max Arment, who is the co-founder and chief product officer at Taulia. In this fourth part, this final chapter, I'm going to be talking to Max about the future-proofing of supply chain financing and dynamic discounting. So my question to you, Max, is when we cast our minds back to earlier conversations that we had in an earlier chapter in this series, we were talking about how the credit crisis of 2008 really put an emphasis on dynamic discounting and supply chain financing. However, we also talked about the fact that it was something that's been very much in play in the corporate world since 2003, so really for 10 years. What's your view on an argument that suggests that there's a window with supply chain financing and dynamic discounting because of the economic levers that are currently in play and that window is closing?
I think there are three things I want to say about this. I want to start with the one that you already brought up. I really think it's a misnomer that there's a perfect storm. Dynamic discounting was there long before 2008. In AP automation cycles long, many years before. Tom Glazanos with Zine, they had great and still do have great success in dynamic discounting, but they had it already in 2004, 5, 6, long before actually there was a crisis. What 2008 did, in my opinion, it just put the spotlight on supplier financing, working capital in general, because there was a credit crunch, supplier couldn't access cash, and then the politicians jumped on that as well. So that's my first point, that actually the crisis just put it on the spotlight but didn't accelerate the reasoning behind it. And that pretty much means, at least from my simple mind, that even if interest goes up to the times before the credit crisis, supply chain finance, dynamic discounting, for obvious reasons, will still be successful. The second item related to that is just look at the factoring market. The factoring market over the last 10, 12, 15 years grows by 20% each year. Year over year, 20% growth. Regardless if we are in an uptime, if we are in a depression, it doesn't matter. 20%, it goes up every single year, regardless what the interest rates are. So there is the appetite, the need of suppliers to have access to cash to be paid earlier. And Taulia and others, we're the perfect alternative for factoring. So that's why we firmly believe that even if the interest rate goes up in the next couple of years, it will be just perfectly valid to do dynamic discounting as well as supply chain finance. By the way, the factoring market, we're not talking here about a little dip. It's a $3 trillion market. It's approaching $3 trillion, I think, in 2013. And one last item, a third one I want to mention is, if interest rates go up, and it's a very simplistic argument, but I think it holds. If interest rates go up, let's say from today 1% on a savings account to perhaps in the future 5%. Let's start with today, where we have 1% is the return that I get on my savings account. And I'm intentionally simplifying things here. Offering early payments to your suppliers for 12%, let's say 12% just for the sake of discussion, is attractive for both parties, right? Again, if we imagine 25% is the supplier's cost for factoring, 12% very attractive to a supplier, and 12% a little bit more than the 1% on the savings account. So again, let's the assumptions. Tomorrow we go up to 5% on a savings account. And I think personally that will take a while to get there, but let's just assume it for a moment. But first of all, the 12% that we discussed before might still be fine, depending on the weighted average cost of capital for an organization. So it might still be fine to offer the 12%. But let's be conservative for a moment and say the buying organization got to offer 5% more as well, 17%. 17% annually for early payment. It's still cheaper than factoring because factoring will have gone up too. Because if interest rates go up, they go up for factoring as well. So I think this is another major point why I don't think there's a perfect storm right now. It just got mainstream right now. Mm-hmm. And it certainly will survive any economic cycles that will happen.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that the concept and the application of dynamic discounting is future-proof. There's not really an urgency for it to apply it right now because a window is closing, that this model does have legs for the future.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely, yes. I still think, selfish as I am here with Taulia, I still think companies should do dynamic discounting projects as fast as possible, mainly because not doing it, you just lose millions per year on discounts. This is why you should do it right now. But there's no reason to believe that this window is closing in 3 years. No. You implement dynamic discounting today, you start saving millions today, and you will for the next 10, 15, 20, 100 years.
I suppose in an economic climate like the one that we have right now, a very strong argument for a corporation to get going with a dynamic discounting program would be that it would actually potentially help suppliers stay in business.
Yeah.
So can you talk to me a little bit about that sense of responsibility, Max, that a buyer might have for keeping, its suppliers in a good cash flow state, and how that theme is coming into your discussions with your clients?
So absolutely. Corporate responsibility is a big topic for our buying organizations. If you go to the websites of our customers, to the press releases, you actually see that many of them, pretty much all of them, offer dynamic discounting as a mean to keep their suppliers in business. One example I want to mention is John Deere. John Deere in the Midwest offering dynamic discounting early payments to suppliers, a very attractive rate. And the main reason John Deere does that is actually to be a good customer to their suppliers. This is a main theme among all our buying organizations, to actually provide something there to their supplier base instead of putting them at risk and moving them to more expensive financing alternatives. So definitely we see that as well.
And do you actually see or hear any anecdotal evidence from your customers about how a model like the Taulia model is actually benefiting the relationship between suppliers and buyers?
Yeah, one thing that we hear all the time is a buying organization knows if their suppliers factor, right? Because the factor that does the early payments to the supplier will call the buying organization and will insist that the payment remit to address is changed to the factor. And what we hear from our customers, that this practically vanished out of their daily process. They don't get those calls from factors anymore because their suppliers now have actually that much cheaper, more reasonable access to cash instead of going to a factor. So definitely that's the feedback that we get from our buying organization, where they obviously help their suppliers by providing early payments.
Max Arment, co-founder and chief product officer at Taulia, many thanks indeed. If you would like to find out more about Taulia or indeed get in contact with Max, please visit their website, which is www.taulia.com. Many thanks indeed and goodbye.